Tacoma, the city that almost outshines Seattle. The first railroad in Washington chose Tacoma. The main seaports were in Tacoma, and its location within the Puget Sound made it the primary destination. The 19th century was the century of Tacoma, but what is the city remembered for now? Once known as the City of Destiny, and in the shadows of the great Mount Rainier, with its beautiful landscape and diverse culture, the city with so much potential is primarily known for the Galloping Gertie. What is the Galloping Gertie, you may ask? It was the nickname given to the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in 1940 due to the sway of the suspension bridge. Now let's dive into the need for the bridge. In the 1920s, General Alexander noted a need for quicker access between the Army base Fort Lewis in Tacoma and the Bremerton Navy Yard in Bremerton, Washington. The effects of World War I still loomed among the military brass, and the primary reason for the push for the Tacoma Narrows Bridge was for national defense. The bridge would cut down the drive between the two bases by 30 miles and get there in half the time. Construction for the bridge didn't start until November 25, 1938. Funding played a factor in the delay, but the main culprit was a ferry service that was contracted in 1926, 1 year before the inception of the campaign for the bridge. The contract was granted to Mitchell Scanzi with a 10-year guaranteed no competition clause. Scanzi's Washington Navigation Company had a monopoly of the ferries in Pierce County by 1927. It was estimated that the cost of a suspension bridge could be between $3 to $10 million, not including the buyout of Scanzi's contract. So the decision was made to put the bridge on hold until the contract was completed. Clark Eldridge, Washington State's lead engineer for the bridge project, first designed the Tacoma Narrows Bridge in 1938. The design was later modified by Leon Moseeff. The modified design decreased the cost by $4 million and could prove to be a detrimental factor to the demise of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. The original design had 25 feet deep chasms that would provide more stability, but the modified design shortened them to just 8 feet. Time of construction also factored. Most suspension bridges take 3 to 4 years to build, but the Tacoma Narrows was completed in only 18 months. The Tacoma Bridge was known for swaying, and many pedestrians would drive over the bridge to experience the swaying bridge. On November 7, 1940, was experiencing unusually high winds, up to 40 miles per hour. At 9:45 a.m., the bridge began to sway, to the point that it was not safe for traffic on the bridge. News crews and engineers came to the overly swaying bridge to observe this situation. There were 2 vehicles left abandoned on the bridge, but no humans were in danger. A.F. Andrew, the chief engineer of the Washington Toll Bridge Authority, later stated, "The solid metal expanses acted like a sail, catching the wind and swinging the bridge. We had planned to bore holes to allow the wind to pass through, but had not had time." At 11 a.m., the bridge, a side girder bulged out of the bridge and it swung at a 45-degree angle. The vertical steel cable snapped and the Gig Harbor section of the bridge caved in. A plethora of analysis has broken down the cause of the collapse of the Tacoma Bridge, and the major consensus is torsional and horizontal deformation caused by wind oscillations. The height-to-width ratio played a factor to exacerbate the deformation of the oscillations, with the ratio being 1/72nd compared to a similar suspension bridge having a ratio of 1/33rd, meaning for every 1 meter of width, there is 72 meters of length. I wanted to try to learn more about this, so I decided to meet up with the curator of the Tacoma Historical Society. What was the need for building the bridge in Tacoma?
Obviously to connect the words, to connect Tacoma and the metropolitan area to the peninsula, and give you an option that doesn't involve going all the way down to Olympia or else using a boat.
Yeah, and so I was told that from my research they were looking at starting the concept of the bridge in the 1920s, but it didn't start construction until the late 1930s into 1940. What do you think led to that delay in getting that?
I feel like there's going to be a lot of contributing factors because everything in history is complicated. I mean, some really broad things to consider are just the fact that the United States economy was in shambles throughout much of the 1930s, so getting the funding together necessary for that is going to be a huge ordeal. And you also have to deal with the fact that while the Narrows is the narrowest part of Puget Sound, and thus the most likely place to put a bridge, it also, at the time of its construction, was the third largest suspension bridge in the world, which is going to present some really unique engineering problems.
Yeah, and so I noticed that in 1938 they had a design for it, but then it was redone. They reconfigured it, so in the 1938 one, the trusses went down 25 feet, but then in the reconfigured version, they only went down 8 feet. Do you think that played a role in the bridge collapsing? I'm
not an engineer, and I understand there have been whole textbooks written about the bridge collapse and all the things to learn from it. Distinct possibility. I'd say looking at how they changed the design for the next two bridges would probably be the most informative approach to that.
Yeah, it was that wind oscillation, and so do you think that how it was one of the fastest bridges that was put up, these suspension bridges, was they said 3 to 4 years. They got it done in 1.5 years. Do you think that trying to get that 1.5 year timeline and speed it up possibly played a role into it?
It certainly could have. Again, I'm not an engineer. I mean, that certainly sounds good getting it done in a year and a half, but they also had all, 3 months use out of it. So not a particularly good investment in the end.
Yep. Do you think that trying to cut the budget and making it the least expensive as possible possibly played a factor?
Another possibility, as again I understand it, that the collapse itself is now a textbook case in several engineering concepts, so there is always a possibility that no matter how much money they'd spent on it, they still would have had these problems simply because they hadn't foreseen them.
That's true. Hindsight is always 20/20, and it's easy for us to look back on it. So there was a ferry contract that, there was a 10-year ferry contract that they had, that was another factor holding back the construction. Do you think that was one of the main factors, or do you think it was the economy of the 30s, or kind of a buildup of everything?
It's hard to say. There's just so much going on at that point. It's a distinct possibility. It's always worth investigating.
Yeah. Yeah, so it cut off 50 miles going from the Army base to the naval base. Do you think the need for the military was the biggest factor for building the bridge, or do you think it had to do with development for houses for people?
No, it's another excellent question. One of the items I meant to pull out and did not is actually a joint program for the opening of the 1950 bridge, but also for the dedication of Fort Lewis. And so at least whoever put that program together had the two of them in mind as a sort of a connecting point. I'm sure having the easy access for Lewis McChord to the Bremerton Naval Base also is very useful, and that might have helped sort of push that extra funding that was needed into it. But they say the ongoing legacy of the bridge has been much closer connections between Gig Harbor and the places on the peninsula with Tacoma.
Yeah. So they wanted to try to use as much of the old bridge as possible. Were they able to use a lot of the old bridge, or did they just dispose of most of the old bridge for the build of the 1950 bridge?
I'd need to review up on that. So from what I understand, mostly it was just the towers that were still vaguely useful, and I'm not sure how much of that they were able to actually salvage. We do have some photos here showing construction at various points, but I'm not sure that would actually answer the question on its own.
Okay. And so they wanted to use the tolls for the original bridge. Was that still the concept for the 1950s bridge, to pay for the debt on said bridge?
As I understand it, yes. And of course that continues to today with the second bridge deck.
Yep. And my last question, so it collapsed in 1940 and was built again in 1950. The need was there, but what do you think took so long to build that second bridge?
I have a feeling World War II played an important part of that. That the need for other materials elsewhere was simply greater. I know Tacoma was going through a huge boom with not only some materials but also labor shortages, and that's even with having a very large influx of population, people coming to work in the shipbuilding and the railroads and the war-related production. Even things like our really nascent industry making plywood ended up being a large factor in war production in Tacoma at that time period. And so even if there was the will for it, unless there was a really strategic need to get those military bases even more closely operated together, I think it just wasn't a priority.
Okay, sounds good. Thank you.
No, thank you very much.
I decided to go down to the site of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge so I can get eyes on and see how it is and get a good perspective.
We're at the side of the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. Today, there are two bridges, as you can see behind me. The bridge on the left was rebuilt in 1950 after it was destroyed in 1940. The bridge on the right was built in 1997. They realized the need for the traffic because the one bridge only had 2 lanes and they needed 4 lanes. So when the bridge first collapsed in 1940, they built it and it was designed as a wobbling bridge, but it ended up wobbling too much, as you can see in this documentary, that it received an oscillation that was too extreme, that once it reached its breaking point, it just broke. So a story that I saw when I was researching it is that the one person that died, there wasn't a human, but there was a dog. So they were in a car, the bridge was wobbling, and the owner of the dog tried to get the dog out. The dog wouldn't come out, it was too scared. Another individual tried going in, bringing the dog out. The dog was nipping at him. And then it eventually collapsed. But that was the only casualty in the Tacoma Narrows Bridge. And they learned from their mistakes, and now they have what they have today.
The bridge was rebuilt in 1950 and constructed more than twice as wide and allowed for better and more efficient airflow. The need for more lanes of traffic allowed for the construction of the most recent bridge adjacent to the 1950 bridge and was constructed in 2007. The lessons from the Tacoma Narrow Bridge collapse changed the concept of suspension bridges, the need for safety, time, and quality over budget cuts and completion in less time. Tacoma will forever be known for the collapse of an immaculate suspension bridge.